Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Hunt Palmer coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Monday. It means we're brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products. Hope your work week's off to a good start. For a lot of folks, last full work week of the year. Trying to put some bows on a few things. I'll tell you, I was walking around the office. It kind of feels like the end of the year around here. I think that's going to be the case here for another 2 weeks or so. But we got a lot to do over the next 2 hours. Got Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos. LSU basketball gets beat up in Frisco on Saturday. Saints have a pretty impressive comeback, but fall just short at the end against Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. We've got a new Heisman Trophy winner. Mike Norvell's given $4.5 million back to Florida State. Plenty to talk about over the next 2 hours. So glad you're hanging out with us here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. We'll start things the way we start each and every day. It's with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's opening drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Well, we heard that LSU was going to be aggressive in the transfer portal, and we heard that there was a lot of money that had been set aside, and we heard that the philosophy of the football program was shifting more and more towards said portal. But we didn't have any results until the transfer portal opens, and when the transfer portal opened, there was kind of a mass exodus from LSU. You had upwards of 15 players jump into the transfer portal and head elsewhere. A lot of depth pieces, not necessarily frontline players, but a lot of scholarships became available when LSU opened that transfer portal. And over the last 72 hours, LSU has made good on that promise to be very active in the transfer portal. They have addressed positions of need with high-level players from across the country, and I've been impressed with what LSU has been able to do. I said back before this thing even cranked up that, hey, you're probably going to have some of the best players on your team come out of the transfer portal. And that may be the case. We will certainly find out. It all kind of got started with Bauer Sharp. We talked a little bit about that on Friday's show. He was the tight end from Oklahoma, spent 3 years at Southeastern Louisiana, went up to Oklahoma. He led a putrid Oklahoma passing offense in receptions on the season. Of course, LSU fans will remember him throwing that ill-timed and very, very misguided interception that he chucked up in the middle of the air for Sage Ryan to intercept a few weeks ago in Tiger Stadium. But he absolutely addresses the need of a big physical tight end that can help you in the run game. LSU had to have that to pair with Tradez Green. You bring in J.D. LaFleur, and your tight end situation looks a little bit better. We knew that they had to go there. Speaking of the end, you need to go to the end of the defensive line as well and get some edge players. Kevin Peoples did a phenomenal job with Savion Jones and with Braden Swinson. Those two guys were really, really good all year. Braden Swinson was as good a pass rusher as LSU had this year. Savion Jones, while he did make some plays in the pass rush game, was actually really good against the run much of the year. And I think both of those guys improved their draft stock significantly over the last 4 months. But they're going to move on. And now you've got Deshaun Womack who moves on. So you look at LSU in the defensive front, and you're going, okay, they got Gabe Relaford, but what else do we have? There's Dylan Carpenter. He hadn't played very much. They got to address that need at edge rusher. They absolutely have done that in a big way. You go get Jamari Butler, who was a productive player for Nebraska this past year, had 3 sacks in the game against Ohio State, 5 tackles for loss. Really, really good player, a veteran who's got another year of college eligibility to his name. And then today they added on to that with Jack Pyburn, who was second on Florida's team in tackles. Both of these guys are 6'5". Both of these guys are north of 250 pounds. They're big, they're physical, they've shown the ability to rush the passer. Pyburn had 8 tackles in the game against LSU just a month ago. So those are 2 guys that you pair with Gabe Relaford, you pair with Dylan Carpenter, and you bring a couple guys in this class, and you've shored up your ability on the edges. I think there are probably still some more guys in the transfer portal that LSU would like to land. Will Helt is one of those who's looked around to a lot of different places. He certainly looked at Texas A&M, certainly has looked at Ole Miss. So we'll see what the Purdue defensive end transfer's future is. But LSU has addressed that with 2 places, Jamari Butler and Jack Pyburn. And then we knew they absolutely needed to go and get a wide receiver. They add Berrien Brown. I will tell you this on Berrien Brown. I'm a little bit hesitant on this one. Not because I don't think Berrien Brown is not a talented player. He's immensely talented. You run 5 kickoffs back for touchdowns in the Southeastern Conference, you have a ton of talent. LSU has run all of 2 back in the last 40 years in Tiger Stadium. Berrien Brown's got 5 to his name in 3 years. He's incredibly fast. He's got some good size, and he's been pretty productive. He was a freshman All-American, and Kentucky just couldn't throw the ball this year, so the numbers are not going to blow you away. I just worry a little bit with Berrien Brown that he's the exact same player as Chris Hilton and as Xavier Thomas. Those guys are speed guys. They haven't been uber productive in the passing game. They're kick returners. Like they have kind of the same type of skill set. I was looking for more of a technician, a possession receiver, because you've got the speed guy in Chris Hilton. You've got the playmaker in Xavier Thomas. I was looking for maybe a 6'4" guy that is a great route runner, kind of a little bit in the mold of C.J. Daniels, quite frankly. But I'm not going to certainly turn Berrien Brown away. I think he's a really talented guy, and hopefully LSU can get more out of him than Kentucky could, because LSU's got one of the best passing offenses in the country, and Kentucky's is one of the worst. So it's a little puzzling to me that you would get the same skill set in Berrien Brown, but hey, he's a talented dude. You add him into the mix. Cornerback, something that LSU had to address. They just have not been good enough in the secondary over the last 2 seasons. There is a talent deficiency problem in the secondary for LSU. I have been to too many practices over the years where I have walked over to the LSU secondary unit and could point immediately to 4 or 5 guys that were going to play in the NFL immediately. I don't mean to just go straight to the most talented room, but I mean, you go back to 2010, 2011, you got Patrick Peterson, you got Morris Claiborne, you got Tyrann Mathieu, Brandon Taylor, Eric Reed, Ron Brooks, Daryl Simon. These are pros. You go back to 2019, Derek Stingley, Christian Fulton, pros, guys that are making huge plays in the professional ranks. Look at Grant Delpit, pro. And they just don't have that over the last couple of years. It's just not there. And you're starting to move toward that, because I think that Jakeem Jackson is a pro. That's a guy that was a high 4-star recruit, one of the top 5 corners in the country when he came out. He played in almost every game as a true freshman. He was a starter in his 2nd season, and he got hurt 2 games in. He's got size. He's got projectability. He's a talented guy. And Corey Raymond identified him as a high school player he wanted to bring into the program at Florida. Did that. Now he brings him over to Baton Rouge. And Jakeem Jackson, I think, becomes one of your best corners immediately. We already know that DJ Pickett is coming in this class. We know that Aiden Anding is coming in this class. Ashton Stamps made some strides this past year. You're starting to look like LSU again in the secondary at DBU. You still got to go get some more guys in the secondary to continue to bolster that, because you've got to be able to cover and tackle in this day and age in football, and LSU just did not have the dudes over the last couple of years to do that at an elite level. And the last one I want to talk about here that LSU adds in the transfer portal was Michael Van Buren. This is really interesting, because I have said this, and I think some others have kind of echoed this as well. I thought it was going to be a weird spot for LSU to go in the transfer portal this year, because while there are a bajillion quarterbacks in the transfer portal every single year, they usually transfer to start, right? Usually don't transfer to sit. And LSU is not going to be able to go out there and get a Cam Ward or get a Dylan Gabriel to come in and play quarterback at LSU. You just weren't going to be able to get a bona fide starter to come in and sit behind Garrett Nussmeier. So you were hoping maybe to get a talented young player who is okay with sitting for a year with the, not promise, but the situation presenting itself that he compete to be the starter at LSU for multiple years after this year is over. I did not think that in that spot, LSU would be able to get an SEC starter, which is what they got in Michael Van Buren. Yes, Blake Shapen got hurt, and that's why Van Buren went in, but he started 9 games at Mississippi State. He threw for 300 yards twice, once at Georgia. I'm not saying that he's Jaden Daniels. I'm not saying that he's going to be a first-team All-American. I'm just saying you got a proven SEC starting quarterback with 3 years of eligibility left, with Garrett Nussmeier still sitting there. Like, that's a really good add. And again, I don't know if he'll ever be the starting quarterback at LSU, but you needed to add a quarterback, and I thought that was going to be tough to do, and LSU managed to pull that off. That's a big, big deal for Brian Kelly, for Joe Sloan, and the football program to go get Michael Van Buren. So those are the additions thus far. You started with Bauer Sharp, you got Barry and Brown, you got Jamari Butler, you got Jack Pyburn, you got Michael Van Buren, and there will be more to come, obviously. I think one of the names to look at right now is Virginia Tech center Braylon Moore. That's a name that has been predicted to LSU here in the last couple of days, and that's a guy that I think would be a perfect fit at LSU, a 2-year starter at center for Virginia Tech in the ACC. You could plug him in, move DJ Chester over to a guard, and you start to set up that offensive line. That right now is my number one need for LSU's offensive line. I don't even really care what position they check off the list. I'll take a center. I'll take a left tackle. I'll take a right guard. Give me a proven veteran offensive lineman at really any spot, and LSU will take him, because you don't have any spot on your offensive line right now that is settled. Your tackles and your guards are gone. Your center is probably going to need to move to guard. So, yeah, you've got some guys who are 4-stars, but you got to add proven talent to that spot at the offensive line, and I think they'll do that over the next 24 to 48 hours. LSU has done a really, really good job. It's amazing as we all kind of start to do this for the first time. This is LSU's first, real overhaul with the transfer portal. They're going to go heavy. I mean, I just rattled off 6 additions and then a potential 7th in Braylon Moore. You figure they're probably going to add 13 guys or so in the transfer portal. That's the biggest crop that they've brought in, save Brian Kelly's first year, where you had to patchwork the entire roster. During his tenure in Baton Rouge, this will be the most starters they've brought in outside of that 1 year where you had to redo the entire roster. And I think they've done a really good job of that. There are still holes on this roster. There still needs to be talent upgrades at a significant number of places, but it's a really good start, and it's following through on a promise and a report that we had that LSU has some money. They're going to be aggressive, and I can tell you, when you look at some of these guys, they are visiting Ole Miss. They are visiting Texas A&M. They are visiting Georgia and Oklahoma. They're visiting Arkansas. They're visiting different places, and LSU is doing the job to get them to sign with the Tigers. So it's been a really good start for Brian Kelly and the program. They got to continue to build that momentum over the next couple of days. There are still spots that they've got to shore up. So that's your Genesis opening drive here on this Monday. We'll step aside. When we come back, the Saints had a terrible first half, really good second half, and I thought a really positive result, even though they lost. I'll tell you about it coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products.
Monday show is brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products, GCOPnet.com, GCOPnet.com. All your printing, scanning, copying needs. They got you covered at Gulf Coast Office Products statewide. Got an incredible team over there. Trey Beal does a fantastic job, and they've got technicians that can come service your equipment. They've got enough equipment to get you extras or a new one in the case of a malfunction. If you don't know why you have the printer, scanner, copier that you do, you just figured that maybe the cheapest one. Trey Beal and his team at Gulf Coast Office Products have clients in every vertical market you can think of, and they know the needs of different industries, whether you're in healthcare, law, education, like us, a media company here. He knows what you need. They've got us taken care of here at Guarantee, and they can get you taken care of as well. If you haven't given any thought to your printing, scanning, copying needs, Gulf Coast Office Products, happy to do that. Baton Rouge Business Report, a #1 office supplies distributor in the area. Well-deserved. Gulf Coast Office Products, GCOPnet.com. Watching the Saints game yesterday, what a wild game that was. Two different football games. Jake Haener gets the start. I had said last week I thought Rattler would get the start, but they started Haener. I'm not sure if that decision was made because they felt like it was the best way to win the game. I'm not sure if it was made because they gave Rattler his shot and now we got to give Haener his shot. I'm not really sure why the decision was made to go to Jake Haener, but I can tell you this, it shouldn't happen again. Because Spencer Rattler's upside and potential and playmaking ability dwarf Jake Haener. And Haener's strength is said to be his decision-making, quick reactions, decisiveness, all that kind of stuff. None of that was on display. And I'm not here to suggest that a man's entire career goes down the toilet because of 30 minutes of football. But I'm here to tell you that Spencer Rattler is a better player and has a far brighter future, a far higher ceiling than Jake Haener. It's not even close. So he ought to play the rest of the way until Derek Carr's ready to go. Like, that's not a hot take based on how the game went. But, like, I didn't see anything from Jake Haener in that first 30 minutes that would suggest that he deserves another shake at this, especially when you saw what Rattler did in the second half. Haener completed 4 passes in the first half. Rattler led 4 scoring drives in the second half. I know the Saints offense is a mash unit. The offensive line's gotten a little healthier, but the weapons are gone. Kamara goes out. It's a tough spot for any young quarterback to go into. It's a tough spot for Derek Carr to go into. But Rattler was far superior to Haener in every way. And I'm willing to deal with potentially a poor decision, to deal with a over-trusting a big arm, some of the mistakes that are going to come from a young quarterback. To have the upside and the playmaking ability, Haener just looked lost, quite frankly. And maybe Haener would be a better option if you were in a well-oiled machine of an offense. If you were plugging him in for an injured Jared Goff up in Detroit and you had that dominant offensive line and you had 2 great running backs and one of the best receivers in the league and everything was really set up, a great tight end, Laporta, then maybe Haener goes in there and it runs a little bit more efficiently. That's just not the case with what New Orleans has going on right now. So while this is probably a discussion as to who's the backup quarterback, which isn't really that big a deal, on the slight chance that you might have your next franchise quarterback, it's definitely Rattler and not Haener. Give him a shot. He needs to play. That first half was awful. It reminded me, and LSU fans in this market will remember, it reminded me of LSU's first half in the 2011 SEC Championship game. Now, the Saints were a little bit more productive than LSU was in that half. LSU didn't get a first down in that half. The Saints barely got a first down. And I realized that Haener had 2 balls that were dropped. I realized that Haener had one big play that was taken back from a penalty, and there were some things working against him. But Rattler came in, looked composed, looked poised, and let it rip, and did a really, really good job. And then the Saints defense cranked up the pass rush and really got after Jaden Daniels. We know Jaden here in this market, and we know that he is not prone to putting the ball in harm's way. But in that way, when he doesn't put the ball in harm's way, he will take some sacks. And the Saints were able to get back there and get after him for 8 sacks in the game. And I was encouraged by a lot of what I saw from the Saints up front. I thought Brian Brzee showed up and made a couple plays. I thought Chase Young looked really good. And I thought that the Saints in the second half played a great half of football. They held a Washington team to only 6 points. Now, caveat here, as again, I've tossed a couple of those in. You lost Terry McLaurin twice, and Jaden didn't hit him. I know that very well because I was in a fantasy football playoff game yesterday and had Terry McLaurin. And candidly, sorry, Saints fans, I was a little ticked because there were 2 60-plus yard touchdowns that came right off the board because Jaden misfired. One was a little bit long, and the other one was just off the fingertips of McLaurin. So I can't throw all the bouquets to the Saints defense, but it was good enough to keep the Saints in the game. And then, look, Spencer Rattler led you right down and hit Foster Moreau for the touchdown on the last play of the game. And I thought Darren Rizzi did exactly the right thing. Exactly the right thing. You're not playing for anything. And Washington's better than you. So why would you go to overtime, risk giving the ball right back to Jaden Daniels? Instead, you got 3 yards to go win the game. Pull a stunner of an upset. You're down 14-0 at the half. Climb all the way back. Yeah. I don't know if I love the play call, rolling it right, cutting the field down, but it didn't work. It doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And I got a text message in my 10-man group text after the game went final. The Saints fan said, perfect result. Rattler looked good. Defense showed some signs. And you didn't lose any draft position. So I think that's probably the way to go for it. This is something we have now discussed for a month. but I'll continue to bring it up. Like, I'm not going to tell you you're an idiot for pulling for your team to win football games. Like, that is a reasonable thing to do. But I also think it's reasonable to realize that moving up in the draft is a good thing for this Saints franchise. And maybe whether you had the 12th pick or the 11th pick doesn't matter. Maybe it does. And wouldn't you rather just err on the good side? Wouldn't you rather just take the chance out of it and just do move up? I mean, I could bring you the most famous example in Saints history that one spot cost you Patrick Mahomes. That's the most drastic example of what I'm talking about here. But that point still remains. The 10th pick is better than the 12th pick. The 9th pick is better than the 10th pick. So if you're a Saints fan right now, losses are not terrible, especially when Kendre Miller shows some flashes, when Spencer Rattler shows some flashes, especially when Brian Brzee shows some flashes. Like, when you have young players that are put out there and start to take some strides, that's a real positive, even if the actual result of the game is a negative. There's some LSU fans that are glad that Jaden gets another win, moves to 9 wins, inches closer to the playoffs. I'm not really going to talk about it from that angle because that's not what anybody really wants to hear about. This is a Saints segment, a Saints market. But from a Saints perspective, I think that's a good result. You played tough against one of the better teams in the NFC. Some of your young guys stepped up. Your coach did the right thing. And you just come up short. But, hey, you've got the ability to move up in the draft. And while you've got 5 wins, and there are some teams that have significantly fewer than that, and you're certainly not going to pick first or second in this draft, if you move into that top 10, I think that's a good thing. The draft becomes the most important aspect of this organization. And so while you can sit there in the fourth quarter and enjoy the heck out of the Saints fighting and scrapping and clawing and showing something from a rookie quarterback, when you look back at it and you peel it to 5,000 feet, you realize, okay, this team, this iteration of the Saints is not really going anywhere. The draft and the player that you get for potentially 5 seasons is more impactful than this 3 hours in the dome. You just got to get it right. So this was always going to be one of the tougher games on the schedule. I think there are a couple more that the Saints very well could win. I don't believe one of those is coming up on Monday in Green Bay. I checked the high, by the way. It's like 26 on Monday. The sun will be long gone down when those two teams kick it off. So it'll be real chilly up on the frozen tundra coming up on Monday. But I think you can absolutely beat the Raiders. At the Bucs, going to be difficult. They're playing good football right now. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that the Saints lost this game. I thought there were some real positives to take from the Saints. And, you know, I think the one thing that you could point to and say, hey, they really needed to win because of this, if you really believe in Darren Rizzi as the next head coach of the Saints, I'm a little skeptical of that myself. But if you believe he's the guy, he needs to win as many games as possible. And every time you lose one, it feels like it becomes less likely that he's the next coach. But I do think he's warranted an interview at this point because I think he's done a really good job. You're talking about piloting this team to wins over Atlanta and Cleveland. You played a tough game against a good Rams team. You go up to New York and do enough to win that game against an awful team, but on the road, and then you come home against Washington, who is a quality football team, and you darn near stole it at the end of the game. So the Saints will play the Packers coming up on Monday Night Football, 7:15 on Monday on ESPN. We'll talk about that as the week progresses. If you're looking for our Saints content, you can always find it on YouTube, Hunt on Saints. Cassie and Jesse do a great job of cutting those segments down, little 10-minute segments that you can digest pretty easily, and they're on audio form wherever you find your podcasts, Hunt on Saints. So appreciate y'all for subscribing there and checking all of that out. Let's take a time out when we come back. LSU basketball played SMU on Saturday. My thoughts on the loss up in Frisco coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com is the website. When you think Genesis of Baton Rouge, you should think luxury. When you think luxury vehicle, there may be some other brands that may pop into your mind first because they've been around a little bit longer. But Genesis deserves a spot at that table for sure. Go on by and see them on Airline Highway right there at PICU across from Women's Hospital. It's a fantastic facility, first class, and the people there are a joy to work with. Their brand ambassadors are so helpful. They'll get you behind the wheel of any of those line of vehicles, and you'll see just how sleek, stylish, comfortable the drive is. You'll see how great that the vehicles look, and they'll tell you about some of the unbelievable offers that they've got, like 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty on every new BMW, on every new Genesis purchase. They got valet maintenance for 3 years complimentary. Fantastic stuff over there at Genesis of Baton Rouge. Check them out online, genesisofbatonrouge.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products.
Good first half for LSU basketball on Saturday in Frisco. Tigers came out in the first half against SMU and played solid in the first half. They led by 6 after only turning the ball over 4 times in the first half. They shot 45%, got to the free throw line a little bit, and they played good defense. They held SMU to 33% shooting from the floor, and I thought really did a good job of controlling the pace of the game early. It was really up-tempo, and SMU wanted to slow it down, so they went zone. And I still think that LSU, in the second half of the first half, so the last 10 minutes of the first half, did a pretty good job against the zone of getting quality looks, and they didn't turn the ball over much. The second half was a freaking disaster. It was absolutely atrocious in the second half. Just terrible, careless turnovers, time and time again, 13 of them in the second half. They didn't shoot it well at all in the second half, and SMU completely took control of the basketball game, and the majority of that was due to LSU's turnovers. There was one in the second half. They were trying to execute just a simple dribble handoff at the top of the key, and they just let an SMU defender shoot right down the middle of it and run it out for a dunk. Like, just lazy stuff. And they just never snapped out of it. It was really difficult to sit there and watch. SMU played harder, they played smarter, and they were relentless against LSU, who just kind of wilted in the second half. You look at the second half box alone, LSU 13 turnovers, 10 of 25 shooting, 2 of 8 from three-point range. And even with all of that poor play by LSU, they still had a chance to come back and take control of the game. They got all the way back into it with 3 minutes and 15 seconds to go. They trailed by 5, and Jai Bailey got a wide open look at a 3 from the left corner. That would have cut it to 2 with 3 minutes to go. He missed that. Then later on, with 42 seconds to play in the game, LSU was down by 4, and Damian Collins got fouled on an over the back, a really foolish foul by the SMU center that sent Collins to the line for a 1-and-1, down 4 with 30 seconds to go, and he missed the front end. And at the end, SMU made 6 free throws over the last 30 seconds and stretched the lead to 10. It really wasn't that bad. That was a larger margin than the game honestly indicated at that point. LSU had an opportunity to go beat this SMU team. It's a good team, not a great team by any stretch, and they didn't play well enough to win it. That's just the bottom line here. They just did not play well enough on the road to overcome that. LSU is going to have some trouble offensively when Victorious Miller and Cam Carter from the 2-guard position combined to go 4 of 15 from the floor with 7 turnovers, and that's what you got. And more you're seeing the identity of this team when they play good basketball teams. When Cam Carter doesn't play well, LSU has issues. He is the engine of the offense. He is the guy that stretches defenses, that can make tough shots, and he's a handful. And when he's off, which he was on Saturday, they struggle to know who to turn to next. I thought Sears did an admirable job. He ends up with 21 points and 4 assists in the game. He did turn the ball over 3 times, but he countered that with 4 steals. I thought he played a pretty good game. but he's not enough to shoulder the entire load. And when Cam Carter goes 3 for 11 from the floor, it's just going to be tough for LSU. They really pared down the rotations in this game. Sears played 34 minutes. Jai Bailey played 39 minutes. Cam Carter, 36 minutes. Damian Collins, 30 minutes, and Corey Chest, 31 minutes. They only used 3 players off the bench. Victorious Miller, 14. Curtis Givens, 6 minutes. And then Robert Miller played 10 minutes in the game. You did not see Derek Fountain. You did not see Mike Williams. Those guys just don't see a lot of action at this point. Noah Boyd is not ready to play. Of course, Jalen Reed is out for the year. So they kind of showed what they're going to be from a rotation standpoint, but you just didn't get good enough play from your backcourt. And when you look up and Cam Carter's got 4 turnovers, and Jordan Sears has 3 turnovers, that's too many. Damian Collins is turning the ball over too much as well. I think that can get cleaned up a little bit as he plays more. It's just not a guy that's played a lot of college basketball, and he was hurt earlier in the season as well. He's now been inserted to the starting lineup. He goes from being what was probably like a 9 to 11 minute guy to a guy that you're asking to play 30 minutes, and that's just going to ramp up his usage rate, and it's going to ramp up some of the bad things that he does with some of the good things that he does. So there was some good in this game, I thought. I thought that Corey Chest, once again, was outstanding on the backboard. He had 11 rebounds in the game. He's been LSU's best rebounder to this point. I thought LSU did a pretty good job of creating turnovers. SMU really does a good job of taking care of the ball. I wrote about this for LouisianaSports.net. They have not turned the ball over more than 13 times in a game all season. They kind of lived right around 10, and LSU did turn them over 17 times. So it wasn't like LSU got whitewashed and they turned the ball over a ton, and SMU didn't turn it over at all. It was almost what and what there. But what I noticed is that SMU outshot LSU from a volume perspective because LSU had a few more turnovers than the Mustangs. LSU shot 54 field goals. SMU shot 60, so that's a 6-shot disparity, plus LSU 18 free throws and SMU 23. So 6 field goals and 5 free throws, that's a big disparity to try to overcome. And when you don't shoot the ball very well, which LSU didn't, just 4 of 15 from the 3 for 27%, it hurts you. If you're an SMU person that's covering this, you probably point to the fact that SMU was only 14 of 23. That's 61% from the free throw line. So you suggest that maybe it could have been worse. But I would point you to the turnovers and say, look, that's part of it as well with LSU. They just didn't do a good enough job of taking care of the ball. So you kind of know what LSU's identity is at this point. It's a basketball team that leans heavily on its guard play, that needs to do a better job of taking care of the basketball. And then when Cam Carter doesn't score, they can have some issues scoring, and they certainly did, only posting 64 in this game. SMU scored 74 with being put on the free throw line a good bit late, so you pretty much held them around 70. That's not terrible, but you got to score more than 64 as well, and that's because you didn't get enough shots up offensively because you turned the ball over too many times. I took a look at the net earlier today, and I wrote a quick story about it over at LouisianaSports.net. Every Monday, I do that, kind of updating where LSU stands as far as the net rankings go. LSU tumbles now to number 64 in the net. Again, that's not a huge deal at this point. There is so much quality coming on LSU's schedule from a resume perspective that where they stand in the net right now is not super significant. SMU is number 40 in the net, so right now that neutral site game, since it's a top 50 opponent, is a quadrant 1 game. These last 3, and Beck, you've talked about this a little bit, are against truly 3 of the worst teams in the nation. There are 364 teams in Division I. Mississippi Valley State is 364. They are dead last in the net. Stetson is 355, so there are only 10 teams worse than them. And then UNO is 335, so there are only 30 teams worse than UNO as far as the net goes. So you're going to have 3 quad 4 games coming up here in the non-conference to try to get better. You got 2 weeks to clean yourself up, and then you got to go to SEC play and see what you can do, because it's going to be a bear. But I would give LSU, assuming they win these 3 games, a loss in any of these 3 games is going to be an albatross on LSU. They need to handle these awful teams that are coming up. But they get a passing grade for the non-conference You had basically a failing grade last year in the non-conference. You didn't do that. You haven't taken any bad losses. Your 2 losses are to neutral site top 40 teams. That's not going to be crippling from a resume perspective. You wish you would get those wins, but you've got a couple banged. Florida State's a nice win. I think UCF's is a decent win as well. So at Kansas State on the road is a quality win. It's a passing grade in the non-conference, but really needed to get this one against SMU to feel strong about it, and you couldn't quite get it done. Just didn't play well enough to win the basketball game. Beck, you sent me a text message in the second half of this game that was not super glowing in your comments about the Tigers. That was just a dreadful 20 minutes of basketball.
Yeah, man. The first half, and honestly, like they played well in the first half, but they could have even. I think they could have been leading even. Well, I can't remember if they could have been leading even more in that first half. Honestly, I can't remember what the score was of the half. It was 33-27.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the scoring right here. In the first half, LSU was controlling the action in the first half for sure. They built a 12-5 lead. That was SMU that built the 12-5 lead. There it is. Okay, they had a 9-point lead when Sears hit a jump shot with 5:41 to go. They led 26-17 over the last 5 minutes, and that was 8 again with a minute and a half to go, and then you allowed Cross to hit a jumper there with a minute to go to cut it. But you led by almost 10 points late in the first half, and just didn't close that half the way you needed to, and then it just all got away in the second half.
Yeah, So the turnovers obviously in the second half was the backbreaker.
It's baffling to me because Carter and Sears are veterans. They've played a ton of basketball. For them to turn it over like that is just disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to really. And Damian Collins also had 5 turnovers.
I think he's going to clean that up.
He will. Yeah, I agree with you. But one of the big things too for that game, and one that I worry about. LSU got beat by 10 on the boards. Yep. SMU had 13 offensive rebounds, and that is going to be a problem, especially without Jalen Reed on this team. But you let a guy, Matt Cross for SMU, is 6'7". He had 16 rebounds.
And not exactly an elite athlete.
No,
he looked
not
like
exactly.
a dude from the rec with the headbands going. He was really accessorized. He had the headbands going.
He was.
Had the arm sleeve rocking. Like he had a lot working for him.
Yeah.
But, elite athleticism was not one of them, and he still grabbed 16.
He grabbed 16 rebounds, and then also I was interested in the way that LSU decided to match up with their 7'2" guys.
We talked about that Friday.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, you have Noah Boyd on this team. Like he can guard this guy. Like obviously you don't want him playing like 15 or 20 minutes a game, but get it like they didn't really have an answer for him. He had 12 points. He only had 12 points, but still, like that's. Like every time he got the ball, he had 2 assists as well. Every time they tried to double him, he made a couple of good passes towards the end of the game as well. So I didn't really understand why you wouldn't at least try to throw Noah Boyd out there and give him a few minutes on that guy. But other than that, man, yeah, the rebounding was a big concern too. Other than the turnovers,
it's a team that has some issues.
Yeah,
I've now watched enough SEC basketball, and I think part of the reason that I've talked so much about the SEC over the last 3 weeks is because I've watched every play of LSU basketball, obviously, this year, and I've watched a lot of teams in the league. And LSU is one of the 4 least talented teams in the SEC. That, to be clear, that could put you in the NCAA tournament. Like this is as good as the SEC's ever been. So I'm not trying to pour ice water on the entire LSU basketball program based on one half of basketball against SMU in December. No, I'm being reasonable about what I've seen in my opinion of it. You don't have surefire NBA guys on your roster. The rest of the league, most of the rest of the league does. And you don't even have elite level. I don't know if Josh Hubbard or Wade Taylor. Hubbard's at Mississippi State, Wade Taylor's at A&M. I don't know if those guys are going to play in the NBA. They're both 5'10", 5'11", but they're crazy good college players. And I just don't even know if LSU has that. LSU's just solid. Cam Carter's solid. Jordan Sears is solid. Corey Chest is solid. Victorious Miller's has got a lot of potential. Damian Collins has some real physical gifts. But you don't have surefire pros. And Trenton Watford, Cam Thomas, you had guys that were going to be pros, and you don't necessarily have that on this team. So they've got to play clean basketball to win games, and at times they've got to play out over their skis to win some of these games. And then you see when they're just okay, or you have an issue here or there, which they did in the second half against SMU, and they just couldn't overcome it against a team that's probably going to be middle of the pack in the ACC. So, again, I'm still encouraged by what they've done over the course of a month and a half, but I'm just nervous about what's coming in January because it's a freight train. I mean, it is an absolute freight train, and it's just intimidating. If you were telling me that this LSU team was going to go play the Johnny Jones SEC, like, I think they were in good shape. I think I'd pick them to win 10 or 11 games. This isn't that. So it's a different world that you're walking into, and if you're not on your game, you're going to get dusted. So it's just, they had been really good for a month, and a little bit of a step back over the last 20 minutes, but they've got 2 weeks now with no school and no distraction, no real issues. They just can go out there and work to improve. You're not going to learn a lot but by what they do against Stetson tomorrow. We'll talk about the game, but you're not going to learn a ton from it. They've just got to continue to improve and then get ready to go in conference play in 2 weeks. So Tigers lose at 74-64 to SMU. They fall to 8-2 on the season. Huge announcement that I think is a wave of the future coming from Tallahassee earlier today. If you haven't heard this story, we'll finish out hour number 1 with it coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. If you're thinking bathroom renovation, like that's really time intensive, that's really expensive, what about some of the easier things that they do at One Bath and Closets? One of them's tub to shower conversions. If you don't use your tub, maybe you got one of those big jacuzzi tubs that were popular in the 80s and 90s and you never use it, but that's a lot of space. Take it out. Put in a gorgeous glass walk-in shower. If you never sit down and take a bath, well then why don't you put a shower there? Put something you use in the bathroom. David Duvall and his team do tub to shower conversions all the time, and he's happy to help you with yours. It changes the functionality of your bathroom, changes the aesthetic of your bathroom, and it can be done relatively quickly because it's a smaller project. David Duvall's happy to help you with all that. Go to onebathandclosets.com and request that free consultation today. It's free to have the conversation with David and his team. Get that done sooner rather than later. It's One Bath and Closets. Onebathandclosets.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Gulf Coast Office Products.
Beck, did you see this story about Mike Norvell today?
Yes.
So Ross Dellinger reporting that Mike Norvell is contributing $4.5 million of his salary this year to the university in a restructured contract. And that's not because he feels bad for a 2-10 season. This is just, I think, the wave of the future. We saw Brian Kelly give back with $1 million, and now you're talking about Mike Norvell giving $4.5 million. And we know that they can't give that money directly to the players, but it's in that vein because there's a finite amount of money everywhere. And some schools have a ton and some schools don't have very much. But you've got what you've got. And we know that if you want to have players, then you have to give them money. That's just the way this goes. So that money that had been earmarked to go to new locker rooms, to go to the new facility for nutrition, to go to whatever the case may be, that money now has to go to the players. Well, somebody's got to continue to pay for that. And if you're paying a coach $10 million a year, or you just bought out a coach for $41 million, or just bought out a defensive coordinator for $6 million or whatever, like, you keep knocking on that same door for all this money, and all of a sudden it may not show back up. So the coaches, I think, in my opinion, as we get ready for revenue sharing and we understand how much these players are going to command, I think some coaches are going to take a haircut intentionally to benefit their football team. Not all of them.
I mean, let's
half.
Yeah, and let's just say though, for this situation, I would think that the way the season played out may have had something to do with him deciding to put this much into it.
I mean, that's a big number, $4.5 million. And I'm not suggesting that every coach is going to give half their salary back to go pay cornerbacks and left tackles. But I think there is a reasonable discussion to be had if your goal is to win at the highest level. Then I think there is a discussion on the front end about what you need to be making in salary. Because if you need to allot another $1 million every year to the roster, instead of making 9.6, you may need to take 8.5. You can still live at 8.5. You can still make the car note, and I think you'll be fine as far as, the plot of land that you live on. But you got to go pay players. And if you take all the boosters' money into your pocket and the players don't get any, you're going to have some lonely practices or a bunch of guys out there that aren't very good. So I think that coaches at the highest level are going to start taking less up front in salary. I thought about this in my head like a year ago, but I just was like, no one's ever going to do that. Like, no one's ever going to just take $1 million out of their paycheck. But you saw Brian Kelly do it last week, and you saw Mike Norvell do a heck of a lot more than that now. And these inflated salaries that kept going and go, well, how high is this going to go? Remember, it was crazy that Saban got $1 million in Baton Rouge. He made 11 or 12 going out the door in Tuscaloosa. Eventually, you got to pare that down to go pay the players. Mike Norvell did so, and that was, I thought, interesting news. We'll step aside. We got a lot to do. Denton Day coming up in 35 minutes talking National College Football. Don't go anywhere. It's a Monday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show presented by Gulf Coast Office Products.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
LeBear's Baton Rouge. You got to make LeBear's your game day headquarters this season. You can watch all the games on their huge televisions, tackle the area's best game day food and drinks, all your friends, or you can go by yourself because they got some really cool individual seating up there at the sportsbook at ESPN Bet as well. Get in on all the basketball and football action this winter with Penn Play and ESPN Bet. Penn's online sportsbook that is now live in Louisiana. You got to score big this season at LeBear's Baton Rouge. It's just a great place to go hang out and watch all those games. It's bowl season. NFL is in crunch time. Monday Night Football coming up this evening. Lots to do and lots to see. You can wager on all those games there inside LeBear's Baton Rouge in ESPN Bet. However you want to play. They're right there inside the casino. You walk in, you go right past the sportsbook. Come on in. It's a fantastic place to watch all the games. You got a gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 if you need help.